As you heard, the new year delivered another boost to Arizona's minimum wage, bringing it up to $12 an hour. Voters approved annual raises in 2016 when minimum wage was $8.05 an hour. And since then, it has divided some. While supporters say minimum wage earners see their spending power improve, opponents say it forces businesses to raise prices or close if they can't keep up. To understand the effects in southern Arizona, we turn to Juan Pantano, an economist with the U of A Eller College of Management. The new increase in minimum wage has been around for a couple years now. People are making maybe upwards of $2,000 more. How has that manifested itself in the community and their spending power?
Well, the first thing that you need to look into is how many people are being affected by this. And when you look at the numbers, it turns out that it's not as many as you may think. You actually end up seeing this only about 3% of workers. Given the size of Tucson, you're talking about maybe 15,000 workers who actually get benefited. And so all this additional money that gets injected into the economy, into the spending power, is relatively small relative to the size of the metro areas.
How is it possible that some people could make less than the state's minimum wage?
Well, there are several reasons. One of the reasons is there are many workers, particularly in restaurants, food services, that work on a gratuity-based arrangement. So they do, for those workers, the federal minimum wage law and the state of Arizona law allows employers to pay up to $3 less than the minimum wage that applies to everyone else, because it is understood that these workers make up with the gratuities, the tips, the difference. So you might have informal workers, that work on laborers or pickups type of workers, or workers who get a daily gig, and those are just paid under the table and they are not subject to any type of regulations, and therefore in those markets the wages are competitive. They are not necessarily abiding by the minimum wage. And finally, there are some loops and loopholes and exceptions, independent contractors or businesses that are bringing in very little revenue, less than $500,000.
This is controversial. I mean, local businesses have been impacted. Have industries adapted along with all these changes?
Well, it's difficult to tell how difficult it has been for the industry side. Obviously, as you know, the business chambers are always going to be on the side of, no, don't raise the minimum wage. But we've been lucky that all these minimum wage raises in the last few years have been along a growing economy. So it's very difficult to really tease out what the impact would be once a recession or a big slowdown comes to Arizona.
As the state's minimum wage rate increases, what sort of industries need to sort of up their game to make sure this continues to be sustainable?
Well, the minimum wage affects especially some particular industries. Agriculture, construction, food services, restaurants, particularly home and personal care aids. And so, to the extent that you put a minimum wage and you keep bringing it up, what you want is that those industries keep growing, so that you don't get this excess supply that we might fear when minimum wages are imposed.
Anything that tells you that when people make more in minimum wage, they buy more cars, they buy houses.
Absolutely. So it's well documented pretty much everywhere. The same thing happens. You get workers who get benefited by an increase in their wages. That type of extra money, you more easily you can see it channeled towards, these people signing up for auto loans more often, buying cars, not necessarily new cars, but a used car, and reducing their credit card debt. And definitely they go it out more.
I know that you mentioned cars, but in your research, any data that supports that when people are making a higher minimum wage rate, their spending power increases and thus it translates into housing?
Not so much on housing, because these workers, even with a little bit higher minimum wage, still not enough, mostly to go on for, Plus, many minimum wage workers are teenagers, people who are just starting out. And so, those guys are not at the stage in their lives where they want to start thinking about a mortgage. But Definitely much less action in mortgages than in cars.
Okay. Dr. Pantano, thank you.
No problem. My pleasure.